done that, you are free to participate in the discussion and the decision on the Planning Commission's recommendation on this matter. And separately, this is legislative, so we're not too worried about bias, but it is nice to know that you can make an unbiased decision on the application as well.
Okay, well, thank you, Lauren. I have Commissioner Beeson in the queue.
There, should be more proactive with my mute button. Good evening and thanks. I'm definitely going to support this. I think it's pretty straightforward. I found as I was reviewing it, there were a couple of things I sort of had questions about, maybe just an opportunity to learn a bit. I had a similar question to Commissioner Ramey. I found myself wondering why not extend it 5 years or 4 years. The way the memo is written and the way that you talk about it, it's compared back to 2008 and the recession. And at that time, it was 3 years. What didn't jump out at me that the COVID recovery period necessarily would be the same. In fact, it might even be longer, although I don't think anyone knows. So I guess I think 3 years is fine. I also, I guess more to the kind of the basic question I came up with after I thought about it. This is affecting projects, or it's affecting land use applications, approvals that are in place prior to the effective date, which I guess is when the council approves it and or when the mayor signs it. And so anything that's already in effect, but the expiration hasn't occurred yet, you've counted it out at 42 or whatever that is. Given that there's a lot of uncertainty around what's going on and how myself thinking, gosh, why wouldn't we apply this to land use applications that are made, say, and I'm going to throw a couple of things out, but say within 6 months or a year after the effective date. It seems like if somebody hypothetically came in, if they had something in process and they had an application approved and it was done 3 months after the effective date, to just make something up, I'm not sure. It seems to me that they're going to need or deserve as much aid during a period of uncertainty as somebody who had their application approved earlier. So I think I would just ask a question of staff. Did you look at that, or is there a reason we've kind of set it this way, or is there any merit to considering applications that might be approved close to the effective date?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is merit to that question. I think one of the reasons that we kind of are operating it in this form is the fact that those applications that are going to be approved, near to or soon after that date, we do have some tools in place to grant extensions through modifications and other time extension tools that we have in our kind of like our normal standard toolbox. So really, the goal of this ordinance is to help out those applications or those applicants who were approved prior to this emergency coming to light. Okay. So, it's the fact that anybody who's applying, now, or even in the last couple months, they're probably well aware that this situation is going on, and they'll be preparing for that accordingly. And so that's kind of the reasons why we're really trying to collect that group of individuals who had no concept that COVID was going to affect us in this way. And at this point, the wildfires.
Okay. So, and maybe just a quick follow-up on that. This seems to be pretty straightforward, and I'm thinking it's relatively, at least appears to me, relatively easy to do. So to the extent that 2 or 3 years from now, there continues to be substantial uncertainty, I'm kind of assuming you could re-up this for some period of time if you chose to do that, and it's not too hard to do.
Yeah, if we receive direction to move forward, I think there's a way that we could investigate applying additional expiration extensions, but I have to look into that a little further at that point to see if they're still necessary or if they would be
yeah, I understand
the same way.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
And just to kind of elaborate on the point that Commissioner Ramey asked as well, if you think about like a traffic impact analysis, that's one of the applications that would expire. And if that didn't expire, somebody could be vested at a much lower traffic rate. And in 20 years, when our population is much larger, we have the ITE manual for trip generation changes. They wouldn't be vested under that. So we could reevaluate the traffic impacts that use would have at that time that it develops 20 years later. So that's just an example that I thought of why certain things expire. So I hope that helps clarify that.
Thanks.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Commissioner Taylor, I have your hand up again for a second round.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question on Commissioner Beeson's question, which was one of mine, just kind of trying to better understand. So first, I'm going to ask the question, then I'll go to my second clarifying question, but this is just a confirmation from staff, just the way the draft ordinance is written, which obviously is modeled after the prior ordinance that was done during the Great Recession, is that so if you've got an approved land use application that has a normal timeline, they haven't applied for an extension or a modification, that they would be allowed a 3-year extension from the time the ordinance is effective. So if somebody could just answer that really quickly, that'd be helpful.
So just to clarify that, it would be extending their expiration 3 years from their date of expiration. So it wouldn't say, so if their application had a 3-year extension period and it was about to sunset right as this ordinance was passed, they wouldn't get another they would get 3 years from the date their application would have expired, not an additional year. The date isn't based on the ordinance, it's based on the application. Let me put it that way.
Okay, so then the example is, for instance, it was approved and it's going to expire in 6 months from the normal application process. You would always be going back to apply this 3-year extension to the decision date, to the kind of adopted date of the application.
Yeah, the effective date of the application.
Effective. Okay, great. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Wait, can I clarify that? I disagree. I think it is. So if the application was going to, or the approval was going to expire in January 2021, it will now expire in January 2024.
Yes, I appreciate that clarification, Lauren. It's my understanding that it would be a 3-year extension from the expiration date of the land use approval.
Right.
Okay.
Sorry.
So it's the expiration rather than the decision.
Correct.
Or the
All right. That's, yeah.
And I think the intent there is to provide the maximum amount of benefit in addition to what the code would otherwise allow as far as the time frame.
Perfect.
Yeah. And so
go ahead.
I was just going to clarify, and this also applies to performance agreements and timelines that are laid out through performance agreements as well. So if you have a phased project that has its own expiration period laid out that was approved through a hearings official other process, then those expirations are based on the dates in that performance agreement and not the ones laid out in code, because the code allows you to set your own expiration dates through that process. So I just want to make sure that that's understood as well.
Perfect. So here's my follow-up I guess it's a suggestion, or it kind of addresses Commissioner Beeson's question, which actually I had, and while he was talking, I thought about this, is I had the same question. So someone comes in, applies tomorrow, and you've got a type 3 land use application. It's got an expiration period of 18 months. You can extend it another 18 months, but you're going to go through a modification application. There's cost associated with that for a timeline extension. So I'm wondering if maybe there's just a courtesy on the side of staff that if there's new applications coming in, that maybe, because I have used this in the past with success under just, financial insecurity, both maybe from a client side or the public, or like the recession, is to request in the initial application the full timeline allowed. Does that make sense? So rather than just applying for the full 3 years, so that to kind of address Commissioner Beeson's challenges, we don't know how long COVID's going to actually, how long it's going to last, what the financial implications are. So just making it aware that's a possibility. Now, you don't get security around the decision, but that in the application, you could request, rather than just your 18 months, you can throw in the extension of the additional 18 months that's allowed, for instance, for type 2. And that would be something that just is noted. So any thoughts around that?
My only thought is, and if I understand the concept correctly, you're suggesting that an applicant would ask for what would otherwise be allowed through a subsequent modification, so that they ask upfront for the code's allotted expiration period plus an extension under the modification process all in one. I'm not sure if procedurally that's acceptable under the Chapter 9 provisions to ask for that concurrently. It's rather based on an application that's made sometime during the life of that expiration period. So I'm not convinced, without doing a little more research, that would be something we could accomplish through our regular practice.
So I'm wondering, one more question, then I'll give up the mic, is I'm wondering, because I agree with Commissioner Beeson, is that if someone turns around within a month, or the hearing date in front of council is in a month, the decision's going to be made. COVID is, the financial impacts could be longer, is maybe within the ordinance saying that anyone that applies within 6 months of the decision can request that full amount. It just is that economic hardship potentially for those clients, or the public or private sector that's coming in to apply, and then financially they're challenged, and it's within a window of that decision date. So that's it. Thank you.
I guess I'll try to answer that in part, and then Lauren, you might have something to contribute here. But I think the uncertainty of the outcome of any particular application would make it difficult to write an ordinance to accommodate it now. In that if they applied within 6 months, it could be, like in certain cases, appeals may go on for a number of years. An application could be withdrawn for whatever reason on behalf of the applicant. And it may or may not be approved within that 6-month period. It would seem kind of arbitrary to pick a particular end date. And I'm just not abundantly clear on how we would craft an ordinance provision to capture it.
I agree with that, Gabe. I would also clarify the timing a little bit for the commission. So Jeff, maybe you can help me out with specific dates. But so we're scheduled for a public hearing in front of the council on October 19th, and then their action date is scheduled for October 26th. This ordinance does not include an emergency clause or an immediate effective date clause. So it will not actually take effect until 30 days after it's approved by the council and signed by the mayor. So you're looking at an effective date at the end of November. So there's a period now where theoretically applications in the pipeline could be approved prior to the ordinance actually taking effect. And, folks, for the reasons that Jeff talked about, I think that at least staff's thinking is the applications that we are really trying to capture are those folks who applied and got approvals prior to understanding, prior to any notice of the COVID pandemic and any idea about some of the ramifications of that. Folks who are applying now may well want or benefit from a longer expiration period, but at least they do have the benefit of understanding that the pandemic is ongoing. And so they're coming into the process with a little bit more information than the folks who had approvals in place prior to the onset of COVID. As Commissioner Beeson mentioned, I think it is the possibility to do this again. So if circumstances warrant, and council so directs, staff could pick this up again in a few years and talk about, who it makes sense to either continue to extend or newly extend expiration periods for. So this is not the only chance. For whatever that's worth, hopefully that information helps a little bit.
And I would just say, as a follow-up to everything that you guys have said, is that for those type 3 land use applications, they all have a provision through Code 9 that allows the hearings official, through their decision, to actually lay out a longer timeline based on whatever they see fit. So if an applicant does foresee, potential hardships that are coming in, they could request that at that time. And so that's another mechanism within our code that we can use to support that.
So I put myself in the queue. I've had a question. I haven't been able to figure out how to ask it. And Jeff, you kind of touched on it. So you're basically, what you're saying is that at the time of an application, a applicant can indicate needing a longer timeline so that the hearings official can accommodate that.
That's only for type 3 applications, though.
Type 3.
Yeah.
So my question was basically, I think Gabe had mentioned an extension or applying for an extension under normal circumstances. So under normal circumstances, an application is about to expire. They can apply for an extension that would give them some additional time. My question is kind of along the lines of, like, under what extenuating circumstances would that normally occur? And I'm just trying to, because I'm trying to encapsulate that into this action, meaning that, normal, obviously something happens to the property or something, information is dramatically changed. And under what circumstances would somebody, would basically, would there be?
So a really good example is a subdivision out on the far west side of town. They were approved a number of years ago. They've applied for a modification at least once for a timeline extension. The reason being is that while they've met our local land use codes for wetlands, they didn't meet the state or federal codes yet. And the state and feds, the state has pretty specific deadlines. The federal government does not, and they're still waiting on some of those federal approvals to come through. And so they're saying, well, we don't want to lose our local approval and have to go through that whole process again just because we're waiting on this response. And so that's a good example of the time when somebody might request an extension unrelated to any sort of emergency and more just around procedures.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't have any other hands up. So any other questions? Okay, so I guess with that, I might ask if anyone is prepared to propose a motion for the commission. Commissioner Taylor, you have your hand up.
I propose a motion to recommend the draft ordinance plus the findings attached to our agenda this evening.
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Taylor makes our motion and Commissioner Fragola seconds it. Is there any more discussion? Commissioner Taylor, do you want your hand up? You probably don't need to, so no worries. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, I'm going to ask for a vote then. So all of those in favor of the motion, go ahead and just raise your hand. I think we can all see you. All right, any opposed? Any withstaining? Okay. All right, it looks like we have a unanimous vote. All right. That was easy. We'll give you guys some time back with your evening. I'm going to ask Alyssa if there's any other items from staff or things that we need to cover tonight.
Sure, I don't have anything big. Just a reminder that your next meeting is on September 28th, and that will be elections and subcommittee assignments, and then the River Road Santa Clara update. Also, as a reminder, if you could get me your subcommittee assignment preferences by Friday, that would be outstanding. I have something I'm going to send out. I've got a couple in already, so thank you. And I'm going to send something out to everyone. It just talks a little bit more about when some of the groups meet and how often, in case that was going to be a factor in your decision making. And the other thing, let's see, October 20th, there's a hearing scheduled for clear and objective code amendments. You guys are on a kind of a roll here with land use regulations. And then if you're really looking for something to do in the evenings, the council has a bunch of planning items coming up over the next 2 months, including, I know John likes to watch these, but maybe others do as well. So tomorrow they've got the joint meeting with Lane County on the airport master plan, public hearing. Monday, they've got a joint meeting with Lane County on urban reserves options, as well as hearings on digital signs, Shepherd Motors, and then there are others. So if you want to pay attention to that, there's all sorts of fun planning stuff going on. Otherwise, I think that's all I have.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything else. Are there any other items from commissioners that you would like to tell us about at this time? I'm guessing you would prefer to go get on with your evening. So. All right, well, I'll go ahead and adjourn us for the evening. So everybody have a good night, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.